My wife's brother convinced her I was having an affair to break us up. The private investigator I hired revealed his true motives. Everything started falling apart 3 months ago when my wife began acting strange around me. She would check my phone constantly, question every late night at work, and freeze up whenever I mentioned her brother's name. The woman I'd been married to for 7 years suddenly became a stranger, watching my every move like I was some kind of criminal. Her brother had always been involved in our lives more than I was comfortable with. He'd show up unannounced, stay for dinner without being invited, and always had some crisis that required my wife's immediate attention. But lately, his visits became more frequent, and each time he left, my wife would be more distant and suspicious toward me. The breaking point came when I found her crying in our bedroom after one of his visits. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong, just kept saying she needed time to think. That night, she moved into the guest room, claiming she needed space to figure things out. I was completely lost, wondering what I'd done to deserve this cold treatment. Days turned into weeks of living like roommates in our own home. Every attempt at conversation was met with short answers and suspicious looks. She'd flinch when I tried to hug her, and the warmth that once filled our house seemed to evaporate completely. I started staying late at work just to avoid the uncomfortable tension waiting for me at home. The worst part was not knowing what I'd supposedly done wrong. When I finally confronted her about the sudden change in our relationship, she accused me of being unfaithful. She said she had evidence that I was cheating but wouldn't show me what it was. The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut because I'd never even looked at another woman since we got married. I begged her to tell me where this was coming from, but she just kept saying her brother had opened her eyes to the truth. Apparently, he'd been feeding her stories about my behavior, pointing out things that seemed suspicious to him. Late nights at work became secret meetings with other women in her mind. Business trips were suddenly romantic getaways with my supposed mistress. The more I tried to defend myself, the more convinced she became that I was lying. It was like arguing with a brick wall, except this brick wall was the woman I loved more than anything in the world. Every denial seemed to make her more certain that her brother was right about me. I felt like I was losing my mind, questioning my own reality. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. I figured if someone was going to investigate my life, it might as well be someone who could actually find the truth. The investigator was a middle-aged woman who specialized in marital disputes. She listened to my story with a neutral expression, taking notes as I explained the situation. She suggested we start by documenting my actual activities to prove my innocence. For 2 weeks, she followed me around, photographing my real routine. Work, gym, grocery store, home, that was about as exciting as my life got. She also began looking into my wife's brother, trying to understand why he was so invested in destroying our marriage. What she found was more shocking than I ever could have imagined. Her brother hadn't just been spreading lies about me, he'd been systematically manipulating my wife for months. He'd been creating fake evidence, doctoring photos, and even hiring people to call our house pretending to be my supposed girlfriend. The level of deception was staggering. But the real revelation came when the investigator discovered his true motivation. He hadn't been trying to protect his sister from a cheating husband. He'd been trying to get her to leave me so he could move in with her. He'd been struggling financially for years, living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment across town. Our house represented stability and comfort he desperately wanted. The investigator found bank records showing he'd been taking out loans he couldn't afford, using credit cards to pay for basic necessities. He'd been evicted from 2 apartments in the past year and was about to lose his current place. His plan was to convince my wife that I was unfaithful, break up our marriage, and then swoop in as the supportive brother who would help her through the divorce. She also discovered that he'd been telling my wife that I was planning to leave her anyway, that I'd been complaining about our marriage to my supposed mistress. He'd created an entire fictional narrative about my dissatisfaction with our relationship, making my wife believe that I was just waiting for the right moment to abandon her. The manipulation was so thorough and calculated that it made me sick. The investigator even found evidence that he'd been going through our mail, looking for anything he could use against me. Credit card statements, work documents, anything that might seem suspicious if taken out of context. He'd been building a case against me using my own life as evidence, twisting innocent activities into proof of infidelity. When I saw all the evidence laid out in front of me, I felt a mixture of rage and relief. Rage at what he'd done to our marriage, but relief that I finally had proof of my innocence. The investigator had documented everything, The fake phone calls, the manipulated photos, the financial records showing his desperate situation. It was an airtight case of calculated deception. The hardest part was figuring out how to present this information to my wife. She'd been so convinced by her brother's lies that I worried she might not believe the truth, even when it was right in front of her. The investigator suggested that we set up a meeting where she could present the evidence directly, removing me from the equation initially. The meeting took place at the investigator's office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My wife arrived looking tired and defeated, probably expecting to see more evidence of my supposed betrayal. Instead, she was presented with proof that the person she trusted most in the world had been systematically lying to her for months. The investigator walked her through each piece of evidence carefully and methodically. I watched through a one-way mirror as my wife's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally devastation. She'd been so certain that her brother was protecting her from a cheating husband that learning the truth seemed to break something inside her. The investigator gave her time to process everything, answering her questions with patience and professionalism. When she finally asked to see me, I was almost afraid to face her. The woman who'd been treating me like a stranger for months suddenly looked like she was seeing me for the first time in forever. She broke down crying, apologizing over and over for not trusting me, for believing the lies, for putting our marriage through hell based on her brother's manipulation. The confrontation with her brother was something I'll never forget. We decided to handle it together, presenting him with the evidence of his deception. He tried to deny everything at first, claiming the investigator had fabricated the evidence. But when faced with his own bank records and the testimonies of the people he'd hired to make those fake phone calls, his story fell apart completely. His desperation became clear when he finally admitted what he'd done. He broke down, explaining how he'd been struggling financially and saw our stable home as his only chance for security. He'd convinced himself that he was actually helping his sister by showing her what a terrible husband I was, even though he'd had to create all the evidence himself. The betrayal hit my wife harder than anything else. She'd been close to her brother since childhood, trusting him with everything. Learning that he'd been willing to destroy her marriage for his own benefit shattered her faith in family relationships. She told him he was no longer welcome in our home and that she needed time to figure out if she could ever forgive him. Recovery wasn't immediate or easy. Even with proof of my innocence, the damage to our relationship needed time to heal. My wife struggled with guilt over not trusting me, while I had to work through my own feelings of betrayal and anger. We spent weeks talking through everything that had happened, trying to understand how we'd let someone else manipulate us so completely. The first few months were awkward as we tried to rebuild the intimacy that had been destroyed. Simple things like holding hands or sharing a bed felt strange after months of living like strangers. We had to learn to trust each other again, to communicate openly instead of letting suspicion and doubt poison our interactions. Slowly, we began to find our way back to each other. Date nights became a regular thing again, and we started talking about our feelings instead of keeping everything bottled up inside. We established new boundaries about family involvement in our marriage, agreeing that outside opinions wouldn't be allowed to influence our relationship anymore. The financial cost of the investigation was significant, but it was worth every penny to save our marriage. More importantly, it taught us both valuable lessons about trust and communication. We learned that keeping secrets, even small ones, could be used against us by people with bad intentions. We also learned that sometimes the people closest to us aren't always looking out for our best interests. My wife's relationship with her brother remained complicated. She eventually had limited contact with him, but only after he'd got his life together and shown genuine remorse for what he'd done. He never moved in with us, obviously, and had to figure out his financial problems on his own. The consequences of his actions extended far beyond just losing access to our home. Looking back, I realize how close we came to losing everything because of one person's selfishness and desperation. If I hadn't hired that investigator, my wife might have eventually filed for divorce, believing I was unfaithful. Her brother's plan might have actually worked, destroying a good marriage for his own benefit. The experience made us both more aware of manipulation tactics and how family relationships can be weaponized. We learned to question information that seemed designed to create conflict, especially when it came from people who might benefit from our problems. Trust became something we actively worked to maintain rather than something we took for granted. Our marriage is stronger now than it was before this whole ordeal began. We communicate better, trust each other more deeply, and have established clearer boundaries with extended family. The crisis forced us to examine our relationship honestly and make improvements that we might never have made otherwise. The investigator became someone we stayed in touch with, partly because she'd saved our marriage, but also because she'd become a friend during a difficult time. She told us that family manipulation cases were more common than people realized, and that our situation wasn't unique. That knowledge helped us feel less foolish about being deceived. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fought for the truth. Would my wife have eventually realized her brother was lying, or would she have gone through with a divorce? Would he have succeeded in moving in with her, or would she have eventually seen through his manipulation? These are questions I'll never have answers to, but I'm grateful I'll never have to find out. The whole experience taught me that protecting your marriage, sometimes, means protecting it from family members who don't have your best interests at heart. It's a hard lesson to learn, but an important one. Not everyone who claims to care about you actually wants what's best for you, and sometimes the people closest to you can be the most dangerous to your happiness. Today, our relationship is built on a foundation of proven trust rather than assumed trust. We've been through the fire together and came out stronger on the other side. The man who tried to destroy our marriage ended up making it unbreakable, though I'm sure that wasn't his intention.